the voice of the UK. This is 5 Live.
Gordon Smart. Listen live on digital, online, smart speaker, or the BBC Sounds app.
It's 10:05. Gordon Smart here, in for Nicky Campbell. Thank you so much for all of your calls this morning on football disorder. I really appreciate them. The text messages as well. Sorry we couldn't get through them all. There were a lot coming in, and thanks to all those guys who called in there as well. Now, a change of temperature. Let's change the mood slightly. It's Friday the 13th, and for the next hour, I want to explore superstitions. I tied my left shoe before my right shoe and didn't put my jumper on until I walked into the studio this morning because I'm buying into this. What do you do? What don't you do to bring good luck and ward off bad luck? Saluting magpies? Throwing salt over your shoulder? Never opening an umbrella inside? Why are we so superstitious? Behavioural psychologist Dr. Rachael Molitor is with me to explore the science behind it all. But before we speak to Dr. Rachael Molitor, I need your help to map the superstitions of the UK. Are some more common than others? Are there new ones creeping in? Even if you know it's nonsense, do you still have a panic if you break a mirror? I learned this morning that some hotels don't have a 13th floor or a room number 13. Never heard that before. So it's Friday the 13th. What is it about superstitions?
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Call free 08085 909 693. Text 85058. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. Message on WhatsApp 08085 909 693. Visit bbc.co.uk/5 live terms for our terms of use.
Gordon Smart here, in for Nicky Campbell. We would love to hear all about your superstitions. It could be anything from how you tie your laces in the morning to the way you turn out your front door before you start your day at work. Now, I think it's probably prudent and sensible to start with some proper expertise here. So Dr. Rachael Molitor is here. Good morning, Rachael.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks, Rachael. Now, I believe you're a behavioural psychologist who has some expertise in this particular discipline. So why is it that we all, or lots of people, buy into these superstitions?
So superstitions themselves are so very interesting, as they actually go against some aspects of science, looking at, rational thinking and certain evidence in scientific areas. But actually, they hold a lot of rational process and thought process as to why we do certain things, like not walking under a ladder. You don't want something to drop on your head, or not walking on 3 drains in case one of them, falls underneath you or something. Yeah. So I think a lot of the sort of superstition is very much based on the element of control. So we don't have control of the environment that we're living in. So by doing certain things, whether it be knocking on wood or, as you said, tying one shoelace before the other shoelace, actually, even though that in itself doesn't actually have an external factor to what it is you're doing, right, if that then links to something that happens afterwards, so if your behaviour that you change, so saying tying your left shoe and then your right shoe afterwards, if that then comes out and you have a good day, or you suddenly find you get, a lucky dip in the lottery or something, you associate that behaviour with that outcome. And then from that, you start to think, well, it's not actually harmful to do that each time. And there is obviously that sort of continuum between a superstition and a behaviour that leads to an outcome, and sort of more compulsive ideas and compulsive behaviours. But it's something which actually is just more, it goes in folklore. It's something which is very much, we tell our friends and our family about it. It's passed down in generations. So superstition is something that, when it's not a harmful thought process, actually it's not a bad thing to do. It's just such an interesting area to focus on in human behaviour.
You touched on it there, Rachel. I think it's really important to talk about the evolutionary aspect of this, because a lot of it comes from old-fashioned traditions, doesn't it? And I love all this stuff. Like, I learned the other day that biting the bullet was about the American Civil War, and anybody who broke a leg and had to have an amputation, it was about biting on a lead bullet because there'd be some purchase in it. But these are similar, these superstitions, aren't there? So things like seeing a magpie, are there any that you can give us an example of that go back in history?
Yeah, absolutely. So before, walking under a ladder, that was really interesting, because it's very much that people used to be on top of a ladder and painting or doing something, and then walking under a ladder is just dangerous with something falling on your head. But also there are a lot of it goes into folklore and into religious aspects, which I find really, really interesting, because psychology and religion always really go hand in hand to look at why people do certain behaviours. So the ultimate one, which is the number 13, and actually the number 13 is from a religious aspect, and it's associated with the biblical Last Supper. Yes. So with Jesus dining with his 12 disciples, he was then arrested and then crucified. So from that, 13 is seen as being bad luck. And people would then not have 13 people at the dinner table. And this extrapolated outwards to, as you said beforehand, not having a 13th floor or not having a 13th room, because it is something which is just seen as like unlucky. And the fear of the number 13 is called triskaidekaphobia. Big word.
Wow.
And it just means that you have this fear of the 13th. So for anyone who does have that and their fear, then today is not going to be a fun day for you.
Well, Rachel, that's a good point to make. At the Last Supper, Judas, who betrayed Jesus, is thought to have been the 13th guest to sit down. And similarly, Jesus' crucifixion was on Good Friday, hence the origin of Friday the 13th being extremely unlucky. God, it's really interesting when you start looking into this, isn't it? But here's the thing, right, Rachel? If you're going to get yourself tied up in superstitions, different cultures have different numbers that are unlucky, right? So you're going to have to stick to the UK alone sorry, Europe and the Middle East for 13. What other cultures can we be wary of, just to add to other people who are listening to superstitions?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been told that Italians fear this number 17, and that's because the Roman numeral XV11 can actually be rearranged to form the word vixi, which actually means in Italian, my life has ended. So number 17 is very unlucky. Oof. We have the number 4 in Japanese and Chinese numerals. We also have the number 14 as well. So there's certain numbers, and you're absolutely right. When you start to look at all the different sort of cultures and different ideas, different religions, everyone seems to have a different number that may be lucky or unlucky to some people. And it's just really fascinating, because in that sense, how many floors in a block of flats do we need to get rid of before no one will live in them because of them being unlucky? It's
a good point, isn't it? And there's lucky 7 as well. So do you know the lineage and the history of that?
I'm not too au fait with the linear history of lucky number 7, but I know that actually in the UK, the number 7 is the luckiest number. That when there was a poll around everyone saying what is your lucky number, and actually the lucky number 7 was our sort of lucky charm in the UK.
Right. So listen, just as a little reminder to people, the stuff we're talking about are like finding a 4-leafed clover as an example, isn't it? Or coming across a black cat. And walking under a ladder, by the way, I'm reliably informed on Twitter here that walking under a ladder has a lot to do with the wall resembling the gallows, where they used to hang people condemned to death. Therefore, if somebody walked underneath a ladder, it was believed that they too would die at the gallows. So it goes back to history. Really sinister, dark history there. So apologies for that. I've got another bit of information for you here as well, Rachel. We've told that hotels in China and Korea don't have a 4th or 24th floor. 4 is incredibly bad luck in Eastern society. And there is a 13 squad number in football. It's usually the second goalie. There is no number 13 car in Formula 1. Great knowledge, Christopher. Really appreciate that. Now, Rachel, do you mind hanging on, because we're going to analyse some of our listeners and their superstitions?
Yes, absolutely. Let's go for it.
Right, Rachel. We're going to speak to Katrina in Reading. Good morning, Katrina.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm really good, Katrina. All the better for speaking to you. And I've got Rebecca in Windsor as well. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning.
Right, Rebecca sounds very chipper and cheerful for the 13th. Now, Katrina, let's start with you. We just had a conversation there about walking under a ladder and how that relates to the gallows in medieval times. What's your particular superstition? What are you scared of?
Do you know, I'm not scared of anything, but I do things like I won't walk under a ladder. I won't put a new pair of shoes on the table. I don't know where I got that from, but I've picked it up from somewhere. So I hate, my son put his trainers on the table. I was like, take them off.
But where has that come from, Katrina? Where has that come from in your life? Were your parents giving you that kind of stuff?
It may be from parents. It's come from somewhere, but it's been there for years and years and years. Don't put a new pair of shoes on the table.
Well, Katrina, luckily we've got Dr. Rachael Molitor, who's frantically Googling, trying to find out. Rachel, can you offer us any kind of insight whatsoever on why putting new shoes on a table is going to lead to bad luck?
Do you know what? I absolutely can do. So placing new shoes on the table is actually thought to mean bad luck for the rest of the day. And this is apparently originated from the coal mining industry. So if a miner died, their shoes were placed on the table as a sign of respect. And so when the miner was not dead, it was seen as tempting fate. So that is the placing the new shoes on the table. Do
you know, that's what I love about working here from time to time. I actually learn stuff. There you go, Katrina, right? So that's this. We've sorted out the shoes on the table and walking under a ladder. I mean, how much does this stuff deal with your life? And whenever my wife sees a magpie, for instance, she always says, "Good morning, Mr. Magpie. How's your wife?" I think. But do you have all of those things tucked away?
I do. I hate seeing one, because I do the rhyme. I don't know if you're aware of it. So when you see one, it's one for sorrow.
Yes.
So if I see one, I think, right, I've got to spot another one.
Right.
So 2 for joy. And then it's funny because on the walk this morning I see 4. So I was like, 1 for sorry, 2 for joy, 3 for girl, 4 for a boy.
Yes.
I always sort of count them and go through the rhyme, always, anytime I see them. And I hate seeing one.
Right,
I have to find another if I see one.
Rachel, Dr. Rachael Molitor is with us, behavioural psychologist. Can you explain why we do that, just for anybody who's been scratching their head this morning listening?
I am also scratching my head to find this because I have heard that rhyme, but again, these rhymes come down from families. So you have people saying, as you said, 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, and apparently saluting a magpie is a way of showing respect. But it's a really interesting one, as some of these things that we have, it's something which doesn't really make sense in society. I mean, I don't think not saluting a magpie is going to give us bad luck particularly, but you kind of focus on something because you are associating that behaviour. So saluting that magpie, then if you have good luck, all of a sudden you think, well, actually there's no harm in saluting it and getting that good luck. And also it helps us then to have that control over the events just in case anything was to happen and you think, oh my goodness, it's because I didn't salute that magpie.
Well, Rachel, we have a great nickname in Scotland, 11 a reef, right? And it's when somebody's showing off, they're always one better than 10 a reef. We call them 11 a reef. So I'm about to spectacularly 11 a reef you by explaining.
Oh, please do.
So magpies have been associated with death. So seeing a lone magpie is said to bring sorrow to your life. Seeing 2, however, will bring you luck. So the rhyme does continue up to 10. It's most commonly used when seeing 1 or 2. So there you go, Rachel. You can put that in your thesis the next time you're giving a speech.
Thank you.
about
I will absolutely do that. Thank you so much.
Now, Rachel and Katrina and Rebecca, I want you to hear this because this sounds like advanced superstition, right? So we've got a text here. It says, I'm afraid I salute magpies and my wife always gives me very curious looks when I do. However, my grandmother used to put all the knives and forks in the cupboard under the stairs wrapped in a tea towel when there was a thunderstorm, and she also passed on to me the habit of spitting when she saw a white horse. That's an anonymous text message. Have you ever heard anything like that, Rachel, Katrina? Rachel, what about you first? Is that one that's news to you?
Again, that is news, and I think that's what I find really interesting about superstitions is there's so many things that have come down from generations that people do just without really realising it. And they may do something, I mean, I know walking on 3 drains is one of the UK's biggest superstitions that we have, but there are so many little things, like touching wood and those sort of things that come down from folklore. And there's folklore and there's also family sort of evolutionary aspects as well. So people, your parents, your grandparents telling you something, and because it's never particularly harmed them, you do it as a just in case, either out of respect for the family lineage or also just because it may have been good luck for them at the time. Well,
Rachel, it's great to have you here because I'm now going to offer your free professional expertise to Rebecca and Windsor. Right, Rebecca, are you there still?
I am, yes.
Now, Rebecca, I think I'm going to join you here and can I confess to something? I tend to get very superstitious when I'm scared or worried about something. So can you share your superstition?
Quite a while ago, and up until the delights of COVID, I used to work for an airline.
Right.
And the first airline that I worked for didn't have a Rule 13. Which at the time I was like, oh, okay. But then when the airline in question, they did have quite a major incident. So I thought, oh, maybe it's because of that. That sort of stayed with me. And then when I went to my new airline, they did have Rule 13, which used to really sort of confuse me because I'd spent 6 years never having a Rule 13.
Oh, Rebecca, I wish I didn't know this, Rebecca, because you know it's hard enough having to do things that make you slightly anxious, but flying is one of them. So presumably that's because the airline thought if people are getting a bit nervous before they get on a plane, they don't like turbulence or whatever, sitting in row 13 just might add to that anxiety. Is that right?
Yes,
right.
I think so. And then when you move on to bigger aircraft, it was because, although it would be row 13, but actually if you counted it, it wasn't row 13, it would only actually be row 10 because of the way that if seats were bigger and things. So I think that sort of curtailed my superstition of 13 right. Because I was like, well, it doesn't exist. It's fine. It's not a problem.
Now, Rebecca, I'm reluctant to ask you this question, but I feel it's my duty to do it, right? Having flown a lot with your role as an air stewardess or air steward, did you have any pilots who had particular superstitions, or should we know that information?
A lot of them used to keep their... It used to be like the way that they would put... Some of them, it was how they put their route plans like in their cap.
Right.
But I think a lot of them kept a lot of their quirks to themselves because they're a unique a unique band to start off with.
How very diplomatic of you, Rebecca. A unique band of airline professionals. Right, Rebecca, well, I'm going to unpick this one because Rachel, we have a behavioural psychologist with us. Rachel's going to explain why that superstition seems to crop up when we're feeling a bit anxious or maybe frightened.
Yeah, absolutely. So superstitions, the negative superstitions, there are two types. There are positive and negative superstitions. Positive ones are such as carrying a lucky charm, and they're obviously quite harmless normally. So you carry something, you may have something good happen, and then you think afterwards, well, it's because I was carrying that lucky charm, or I put on, my lucky pants that day, or something that happened. Whereas negative superstitions, they are ones such as you said, the number 13 may make something bad happen. And actually that's because in certain situations we can have quite an anxious sort of thought process, and these levels of anxiety can be associated with the events that may bring out a superstition, like flying or any sort of fears that we may have. So when we see something that may be completely harmless in a positive superstition world, when that's in the negative superstition world, automatically we associate that with that negative outcome. Right. So from that, we would look at number 13, the row 13, as you said, having an issue and being sort of anxiety inducing, which ironically then the 13 is also lucky in other countries. So not having a row 13, right, if that plane may have gone to another country, then actually they will get there being like, I wish I could sit in number 13 because that's lucky. So gotcha. Again, it's very cross-cultural.
Right, well, please do get in touch if you've got any stories about superstitions crippling you. 08085 909 693. Please do get in touch. Right, listen to this, guys. Right, we've got Martin Duke in Keswick has been in touch with an alarming statistic. He says 13. The Apollo 13 incident happened on April the 13th. Regards, Martin. Thanks for that, Martin. We really appreciate you reinforcing all of our fears there. And we've got another one here from Simon in Hertfordshire. He says, as an estate agent for many years, I realised that some roads don't have a number 13. Used to confuse you as you're counting the numbers, knowing you've counted along correctly. Finding you end up at the wrong number. Has your road got a number 13 is the question that Simon's asking. So yeah, superstitions and number 13. And it tees us up perfectly for Mark in Haringey, who I believe may have issues with today's date. Good morning, Mark. Mark, are you there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like I'm actually tempting fate even by mentioning my own inner fears about this particular day of the week and date of the month. I don't even want to say that combination. It's mainly because, they weren't life-changing things, but I do remember a particular date in 1980 when I failed my maths O-level. Luckily, I came back and passed it a few months later, but it was still that particular day.
It was 40 years ago, Mark. 40 years ago. You're still carrying it around.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, dear me.
Absolutely. And I got burgled on that particular combination 10 years ago. And again, I think I was saying to your researcher, it was the year as much as anything else. I should have almost foreseen it coming. It's irrational. But I guess that certain things get into your psyche and it's very hard to shake them off. Yeah.
Well, how does it manifest itself now then, Mark? What do you do when the 13th comes around?
I was saying to them, normally I don't interact with anybody. And this is why I almost feel like I'm trying to, in a sense, hopefully trying to battle that inner demon by phoning up a national radio station and saying this,
Yes.
Because I just want to try and, to me, it's almost irrational. I don't want to say it's completely nonsensical, because there's obviously something about it, as you've said. That lady said, that about the Last Supper and Good Friday and all those kind of stuff. And yeah, it is an irrational fear.
Yeah, it sounds like
I'm trying to normalise it slightly anyway.
Yeah, it sounds like it's quite deep rooted there. So all the temptation there is to be facetious or flippant about it. I'm not going to do any of that because we do have Dr. Rachael Molitor, behavioural psychologist, offering free advice to you today. So Rachel, that sounds like a deep rooted issue that Mark's got there. And how would you recommend handling something like that as a behavioural psychologist?
Absolutely. So it's completely, as you said, or as Mark said, it's quite an irrational fear in the sense of the 13th. But actually, when things have happened at this time, then you then look at those things and say, well, that happened on that date, so it must have been because of that date. So that is something called counterfactual thinking. So when you do something, whether it be today, you'll be looking out for things that may particularly not go to plan, and then you blame it on the external factor being Friday the 13th. So there may be times when actually bad things or things don't go to plan, and because it's not Friday the 13th, then automatically we don't sort of link those two things together. Right. So this counterfactual thinking, the best thing to do to be able to to get rid of this worry and this fear of Friday the 13th is look out for the positive things that happen today. So focusing on the negative things that may happen or the negative things associated to number 13. Instead, if we look at the positive things, the things that have gone well today, then actually you realise they do balance out. And, tomorrow being Saturday the 14th, something might happen. We don't know, but we don't associate it with being Friday the 13th at that point. So it is very much, as we said as well, like looking at tempting fate by coming onto the radio station. But actually, this is a really positive thing that you've done by coming up and ringing up and speaking to us. So
Rachel, this
is a positive thing.
There's not enough positivity in the world right now. So
Absolutely
Mark, in an evangelical preacher fashion, you're cured, Mark. You're cured. How do you feel?
And I wish that lady all the very best for what she's surmising. And I'm pretty sure she's spot on. It's just an irrational whatever. And I guess that if it wasn't that, it would be something else. And I guess we all have these inner fears, demons, whatever you want to call them, and Great. This is just another manifestation of it all,
Well, Mark, without being too Scottish and undermining this and pulling the rug from under your feet, you've still got another 14 hours to go, right? So just wrap yourself in cotton wool.
I'll be damn relieved when it gets to midnight. I'll always want to party like it's 1999 or something anyway.
Yes, or not 2013.
Anyway, good luck to you.
Mark in Haringey, thank you very much. Right, good man, there he is. Okay. The new recovered and cured Mark in Haringey there, who's no longer got a problem with Friday the 13th, thanks to Rachael Molitor. And we've got Serena in Cumbria. Serena, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Right, Serena, I'm pleased you've got on because I actually thought I was subject to a wind-up from the staff of 5 Live this morning. They were teeing me up to go on the radio and say, hotels don't have a room 13 or a floor 13. Can you confirm or deny this information based on your profession?
I can confirm it. We have 3 hotels and none of them have a room 13.
Oh, Serena, I feel so daft. I spend my life in hotels and I've never noticed this. So why has this become a thing? Was this something you changed when you got involved in the hotel, or is that something that exists and I just wasn't aware of it?
It is something that has existed. We inherited each of these hotels without a room 13. And I think your previous caller, imagine Mark if he was going to, coming away for a special event, maybe he's going to propose to his partner or celebrate his anniversary, and he had room 13. That could really put him off. Well,
Serena, let me turn this on its head, as all good radio hosts should do, and say, what about the folk that want the danger of room 13? Do you get any of that? Interesting members of society. I think I might have started a new club here, Serena.
I think you can get your danger thrills in other ways. Probably going to be a bit more exciting.
I'll just remind you, it's 10:30 on the radio this morning, Serena, so we'll keep that one away. Now, Rachel, I'm going to come back to you on that one. It's really interesting that this is now playing a part in business. You heard from Serena there that it's a significant reason for them not to have it. I mean, it's quite a deep-rooted thing, the number 13, by the sound of it.
It really is, and it's one of the biggest superstitions that we have. And as we said beforehand, this triskaidekaphobia, there we go, don't try and say that quickly, is actually a deep-rooted fear, and it is known to be scared of the number 13. And because of it, people don't want to do certain things, as we said, the 13th row in a plane, or the 13th floor of a building, or the 13th house. And because of that, this is very much a UK fear as well, in that sort of sense, because there are, as we've just discussed at the very beginning of this programme, other numbers that may not be lucky in other countries. So whereas we might not have the 13th floor, in Italy they might not have the 17th floor, or they may not be 14th floor. So it's about looking at the culture that we're living in and how we can have these sort of deep-rooted fears, but also understanding that 13 in itself is just a number. And so by, again, taking away the fear from the number and what it's representing in the human behaviour and the wider spectrum is really important to note that actually good things can happen on the 13th too. People can get married on the 13th. People can have children on the 13th. I mean, if your birthday is on the 13th, would you class that as being an unlucky birthday, or would you see that as a lucky thing?
I'm very pleased you teed that up, because it's an opportunity to say happy birthday and put a positive spin on this story, because David called in and said today is his 67th birthday. Happy birthday, David, 67 years young. And he said he was born on Friday the 13th and he feels very lucky. So turning on his head, Rachel, it means you can see it as a positive.
You can absolutely see it as a positive. And I think this is what's really important to look at these things. There are these superstitions out there that are in either folklore or rational sort of things, such as we said, the ladder, or walking on 3 drains, or, having a black hole, opening an umbrella indoors. I mean, that that's a rational understanding, because that also, it doesn't rain indoors, and it's something which it's just such an interesting area to look at in the psychology of superstitions. But we do it so often in counterfactual thinking, and that's one of the main areas we can really focus on to see how actually doing something, like I know we talk about sports a lot on Radio 5 Live, and wearing your lucky socks. So if you're to wear your lucky socks and you are to get a goal while you wear your lucky socks, that's just our psychological bias at work.
Yeah.
So we're far less likely to remember the time we've missed a goal while wearing the same socks. But actually believing them, and this is where it's really important, believing those lucky socks are lucky could actually make you then play better, because you have the illusion of having this greater control over the event. So even though superstitions may seem completely, out of science and irrational, as Mark had said, to some people, it's also important to note that actually it may help you with that element of control and that confidence to do something better, positive again.
Well, that's brilliant. Rachel, I'm going to ask you to hang on for another half hour, because I feel that your expertise is very helpful here. We're talking about superstitions on Radio 5 Live. Football and sport are absolutely riddled with them, so please do get in touch with yours. 08085 909 693. Like Paul Ince, do you not put your shirt on until you've walked out onto the pitch? Do you do your left laces before your right laces? Or maybe like News and Sport, who've just walked in, they did some very strange rituals before they came in to do their duties today. It reminded me of a story, actually. David Coulthard, the Formula One racing driver, had a pair of lucky pants, which were very lucky until he had an accident, Rachel, on the racetrack, I should say, and then had the embarrassment of having his overalls torn off to see these terrible pants he'd been wearing since he was about 15 years old. So it can backfire. Please do get in touch with your superstitions. 08085 909 693. Gordon Smart in for Nicky Campbell. I would love to hear from you.